Sure, here's a great, deep and detailed summary of the Sannyasi revolt, written in the simplest English but rich with all the important points. It's clear, complete and easy to remember, perfect for learning or revision. The Sannyasi revolt, deep detailed summary, 1763 to 1800. Region, Bengal and parts of eastern India. Time period, mainly between 1763 and 1800. Leaders, no single leader. Groups of Hindu monks, sannyasis. Background, what was happening in Bengal? In 1757, the British East India Company defeated the Nawab of Bengal in the Battle of Plassey and started ruling Bengal. They brought new rules to collect more taxes. These rules hurt everyone: peasants, poor farmers, zamindars, landowners, and artisans, skilled workers. What made things worse? 1. Economic pressure. British increased land taxes. Peasants had to pay even if crops failed. If they couldn't pay, land and homes were taken. Artisans lost jobs because British goods from England replaced Indian products. 2. The Great Bengal Famine 1770. A horrible famine hit Bengal. Nearly 10 million people died. British still collected taxes and did not help starving people. 3. Religious interferences, who were holy men, used to travel to temples and sacred places. British made rules that stopped them from moving freely. They were also prevented from collecting donations, which they depended on. Why did the sannyasis revolt? The sannyasis saw the suffering of common people. No food, no money, no help. They had a tradition of standing up against injustice. The British blocked their freedom of travel and religious practice. They decided to fight back. Their revolt was not just for themselves. It was to support the poor people and resist British cruelty. What did the sannyasis do? They formed armed groups. They attacked British factories, government money stores and offices. They used guerrilla tactics, sudden surprise attacks. They became a symbol of resistance in the region. Local people supported them because they were fighting for justice. How did the British respond? The British were shocked and scared. They sent armies to fight the sannyasis. Warren Hastings, the British Governor-General, took military action. The fighting went on for many years, from the 760s to around 1800. After many battles, the British finally crushed the revolt. Outcome and importance, feature, explanation. Failed militarily, the British stopped the revolt after years of fighting. Social impact. It showed that even holy men and common people could rise up against injustice. Early resistance was one of the first major revolts against British rule, even before 1857. Inspired future rebels. The bravery of the sannyasis later inspired other freedom fighters in India. Final summary in short points. 1. After 1757, the British took over Bengal and made unfair tax rules. 2. This hurt farmers, landowners and workers. 3. In 1770, a terrible famine killed millions, but the British did not help. 4. Sannyasis, holy monks, were also blocked from travelling to holy places. 5. Angry and determined, the sannyasis took up arms. 6. They fought bravely, attacked British centres and became symbols of resistance. 7. After many years, the British finally stopped the revolt, but it became a powerful example of protest. Why the sannyasi revolt matters in history. It was not just a religious movement, it was a people's revolt. It showed that British rule was cruel, even in the early years. It reminds us that resistance to injustice can come from anyone, even monks who usually live in peace. It was an early warning sign for the British that India would not stay silent forever. Would you like this in a comic strip, timeline, or as Q&A flashcards for study and revision? Here is a great, deep and very detailed summary of the Sannyasi Revolt 1763 to 1800 in the simplest and easiest way, like explaining to someone with no background knowledge. What was the Sannyasi Revolt? The Sannyasi Revolt was a big rebellion, a fight or resistance that happened in Bengal and eastern India from 1763 to 1800. It was a strong and early protest against British rule in India. When did it happen? From 1763 to 1800, almost 37 years of small and big revolts. What caused the revolt? One big famine of 1770. A famine means no food or not enough food. In 1770, there was a terrible famine in Bengal. Millions of people died of hunger. British rulers did not help properly. They were cruel and careless. 2. British economic rules were harsh. British made new money rules that hurt Indian people. Zamindars, landowners, peasants, farmers, and artisans workers suffered a lot. Many people lost their land or their work. 3. Anger of sannyasis. Sannyasis are people who leave their homes to live simple spiritual lives. In Bengal, many of them used to visit temples and holy places. British put restrictions on these visits. Sannyasis became angry. They had a tradition of fighting against injustice. Who fought in the revolt? It was not just the sannyasis. Many other poor and angry people joined. 1. Sannyasis, spiritual leaders. Many were once farmers or soldiers. 2. Dispossessed zamindars, landowners who had lost their land. 3. Rural poor, farmers who were jobless or starving. 4. Disbanded soldiers, soldiers who lost their jobs after British came. 5. Common people, both Hindus and Muslims fought together. Important leaders of the revolt. Here are some famous leaders of the revolt. Majnum Shah, a fakir leader, Muslim saint. Chirag Ali, another fakir leader. Musa Shah, one more fakir fighter. Bhawani Pathak, a Hindu sannyasi leader. Debi Chaudharani, a woman who fought bravely, leading her own group. Important note, the revolt had both Hindus and Muslims fighting side by side, showing unity against the British. What did they do? Raided, attacked British factories and treasury offices, fought battles with British soldiers, tried to push out the British from their land. How did it end? The British did not give up easily. It took them many years and many fights to stop the revolt. Finally, Warren Hastings, a British governor, sent military forces to crush the revolt. In books and novels, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, a famous Bengali writer, wrote Anandamath, a semi-historical novel, part fiction, part real, based on this revolt. He also wrote Devi Chaudharani, about the female leader Debi Chaudharani, showing how women also fought the British. Why is this important? The Sannyasi revolt was one of the first big fights against British rule, before the famous revolt of 1857. It showed that ordinary Indians, sannyasis, peasants, zamindars, Hindus, Muslims, even women, were ready to stand up and fight for their freedom and dignity. In simple words, the British hurt the people of Bengal by taking their land, not helping them during famine, and stopping their religious practices. So, angry sannyasis and common people, both Hindu and Muslim, started fighting back. They attacked British offices, fought battles, and became heroes. One of the few early women freedom fighters, Debi Chaudharani, also fought bravely. Their struggle was written about in famous books like Anandamath. Would you like a timeline, map, or more comic strips for this? I can create them for you in simplest style.
Sure. Here's a great, deep, detailed summary of the Chuar and Ho risings, written in the most clear and simple way possible, but also rich with all the historical information, causes, leaders, events, methods and results, everything you need to fully understand the topic deeply and clearly. Deep, detailed summary, Chuar and Ho tribal risings, 1768 to 1837. What were these risings? The Chuar and Ho risings were tribal uprisings, revolts or rebellions that happened in eastern India, especially in present-day West Bengal and Jharkhand, between the mid-1700s and early 1800s. These were resistance movements by tribal people against the British East India Company's rule, economic exploitation, and loss of tribal independence. Part 1. The Chuar Uprising, Midnapore, Bengal. Who were the Chuar? The Chuar were a tribal group, mainly living in the jungle mahals, forest regions of Midnapore district, Bankura and Purulia in West Bengal. They were Aboriginal people, meaning they were the original forest-dwelling communities. They made a living by farming, forest produce, and traditional rights over land and jungle. What caused their uprising? 1. Famine. There were severe food shortages, and many people were starving. Even during famine, the British still demanded taxes from the tribal people. 2. Increased land revenue, taxes. The British East India Company raised land taxes. If people couldn't pay, their land was taken away and given to rich landlords, zamindars. 3. Loss of traditional rights. Tribes like the Chuars had old rights to collect wood, hunt and farm in forests. British rules took away these rights and interfered in tribal life. 4. Economic hardship. Many tribal people were made landless and jobless. They were often forced to work as bonded labourers like slaves for landlords. Who led the Chuar rebellion? Local tribal kings and zamindars, chiefs, many of whom were turned into rebels after losing their power and wealth. Main leaders included the Rajas of Dalbum, Barabum, Dholka, and Kailapal. These Rajas united and led the Chuar people to revolt in 1768. How did they fight? The Chuars followed a scorched earth policy. That means they burned their own villages, crops, and forests so the British soldiers could not get food or shelter. They attacked British outposts, loot centres, and local revenue offices. Their guerrilla-style tactics, hit-and-run attacks in forests, made it hard for the British to defeat them. Timeline of Chuar uprisings. 1768, first large rebellion by the Chuars begins. Late 1790s, uprisings continue, spread wider. 1799, a major Chuar rebellion led by Durjan Singh, a dispossessed zamindar, shakes the region. Early 1800s, the British slowly crushed the rebellion using large military forces. End result of Chuar uprising. The rebellion was eventually suppressed by the British using military force. But it exposed the deep anger and suffering of tribal people. The spirit of tribal resistance inspired later revolts in eastern India. Part-2, Ho and Munda Rebellions, Chota Nagpur Plateau. Who were the Ho and Munda tribes? The Ho and Munda were major tribal groups living in the Chota Nagpur Plateau, especially in Singhbum and Ranchi areas, modern-day Jharkhand. Like the Chuars, they were independent forest tribes, with their own social systems, tribal chiefs, and customary laws. They did not accept outside rule easily. Why did they rebel? 1. Loss of land and forests. The British gave tribal lands to non-tribal landlords, who charged high rents and treated tribals badly. Forests were taken over by British laws. Tribals could not freely hunt or gather wood. 2. High taxes and forced labour. British and zamindars imposed heavy taxes. Tribals were often forced into begar, unpaid forced labour. 3. Disrespect to tribal systems. The traditional tribal headmen called Mankeys and Mundas were ignored or replaced. British officers treated tribal people as uncivilized and inferior. When did they rise? 1820 to 1822, first major Ho revolt. 1831, second major uprising by the Ho and Munda tribes. 1831 to 1837, the area remained disturbed by continuous tribal resistance. How did they fight? Like the Chuars, the Ho and Munda fought using guerrilla warfare. They knew the forest paths well and used them to ambush British troops. They attacked British forts, police stations, and tax collection centres. Result of Ho and Munda rebellions. The British eventually crushed the rebellions with heavy force. But the tribal anger remained alive and would later fuel other big revolts like the Santhal Rebellion, 1855, and Birsa Munda's Ulgulan, 1899 to 1900. Historical importance. These risings show us that tribal people were not passive. They fought bravely for their land, rights, and identity. Even before the Great Revolts of 1857, tribal resistance was alive in eastern India. These movements were part of India's early freedom struggle, though they are not often taught in detail. Final takeaway, in simple words. The Chuar, Ho, and Munda tribes were independent forests. Here is your great, deep, detailed summary of the revolt in Midnapore and Dalbum, 1766 to 1774. Written in simple, clear, beginner-friendly language, with all historical facts, causes, people, places and outcomes included. Deep, detailed summary. Revolt in Midnapore and Dalbum, 1766 happen. Where did this revolt happen? The revolt took place in Midnapore district and surrounding forested regions called Jungle Mahals, located in present-day West Bengal, India. It included regions like Dalbum, Manbhum, Raipur, Panchet, Jatibuni, Karnagar, and Bagri. When did it happen? The revolt occurred during the years 1766 to 1774, but its effects and resistance continued into the early 1800s. Who were involved? Door 1. Zamindars and talukdars, local landlords who owned land and collected rent from farmers. There were about 3,000 zamindars in Midnapore at that time. 2. Ryots, farmers or peasants who worked on the landlord's land. They paid rent or shared a part of their crops. 3. British East India Company, foreign traders from Britain who had taken political control of Bengal and other parts of India. They were not Indian rulers but outsiders. 4. Leaders of the revolt. Damodar Singh and Jagannath Dal were the main leaders who led the resistance. What caused the revolt? Main reasons. 1. British control over Midnapore, 1760. The British took over Midnapore from local rulers in 1760. They replaced the older traditional system with foreign control. 2. Introduction of a new land revenue system, 1772. In 1772, the British changed how land taxes were collected. High fixed taxes were demanded from landlords, even during famine, drought or crop failure. Landowners had to pay even if farmers had no harvest. 3. Suffering of farmers, ryots. The farmers, ryots, were poor and could not afford to pay such high taxes. Many began protesting or refusing to pay. 4. Zamindars support ryots. The zamindars of Midnapore stood by their farmers. When farmers and British tax collectors clashed, the zamindars supported the farmers, not the British. This angered the British, who expected landlords to help them collect money. 5. Repression of zamindars in jungle mahals. The zamindars from tribal and forest areas, like Dalbum, Panchet, Karnagar, and others, were seen as rebellious. The British punished them by taking away their land and power. By the early 1800s, many had been dispossessed. They lost their estates and status. The revolt begins. As the British became more aggressive, many landlords and farmers rose up in rebellion between 1766 to 1774. The movement was especially strong in forest and tribal regions, where people were used to living freely and independently. Main leaders of the revolt: Damodar Singh, a local leader who organized resistance in the jungle mahals. He united dispossessed landlords, tribal warriors and farmers. 2. Jagannath Dal, another important figure who led anti-British action in the region. He mobilized people against unfair taxation and British oppression. What did the rebels do? They attacked British officials, tax collectors and government centers. Villagers refused to pay taxes. Rebels tried to take back lands and re-establish local rule. In some places, zamindars refused to recognize British authority. How did the British respond? The British saw this as a serious threat. They used military force to crush the revolts. By the early 1800s, they had disarmed rebel leaders, destroyed their estates, taken full control over the jungle mahals, removed old zamindars from power. What was the result? The revolt was defeated by the British. Many tribal and forest zamindars lost their land and influence. The British tightened their control over revenue collection and governance. But the revolt showed early signs of tribal and local resistance against colonial rule. That rural India was not silent. People were ready to fight when pushed too far. Why is this revolt important? This was one of the earlings against British rule before the 1857 revolt. It involved tribal communities and landlords, united with farmers. It shows how the British land policies caused massive suffering in Indian villages. It helped inspire future tribal and peasant revolts across India. Quick summary table, aspect at details. Region Midnapore, Jungle Mahals, West Bengal. Time 1966 to 1774, effects till 1800s. Cause British tax system, famine, oppression. Groups, Zamindars, riots, tribal leaders. Leaders, Damodar Singh, Jagannath Dal. Action, rebellion, attacks, refusal to pay taxes. Result, suppressed by British, Zamindars lost land. Importance, early anti-British resistance, tribal unity. Would you like comic strips of this story? Mind map for revision? One-page printable notes? Let me know how you'd like to learn next. Here is a great, deep, detailed summary of the Coal Uprising, 1831 to 1832, in the simplest language, with full background, reasons, events and consequences, everything explained clearly. Coal Rising, 1831 to 1832, detailed summary. Background, who were the Coals? The Coals were tribal people, living in the forest and hilly regions of Chotanagpur Plateau, in present-day Jharkhand. Their society was communal, meaning land was shared and managed by the whole community. The Mundas were tribal chiefs or village headmen. They managed the land and settled disputes. Coals had their own way of life, simple, nature-based and peaceful, without landlords or taxes. What changed? Before the rebellion, when the British East India Company took control of the region. 1. New land laws introduced. British made land a private property. Tribal land was taken away from Coals and Mundas. Outsiders, non-tribals, were given ownership of tribal land. At the 2. Outsiders entered tribal land. Sikh and Muslim farmers, moneylenders and landlords came to settle. They bought or were gifted land by the British. The tribal people had to pay rent to these new landlords. 3. Exploitation and injustice. Coals were forced to work as labourers on their own land. They were abused, cheated, and insulted. Traditional tribal leaders lost their authority and respect. Why the Coals rebelled? Causes. Reason, explanation. Loss of land. The tribal people lost control of their land to outsiders. Power shift. The Mundas lost their status. Outsiders controlled the area. Exploitation. Outsiders demanded rent, taxes, and free labour. Humiliation. Tribal customs, leaders, and culture were disrespected. No justice. The British courts favoured the outsiders, not the tribal people. What happened in the Coal Rising? In 1831, the Coals rose in rebellion. Their anger turned into organised attacks. The rebels killed around 1,000 outsiders, burned houses, farms and British offices, destroyed property of landlords and moneylenders. The rebellion spread like wildfire across Ranchi, Singhbhum, Hazaribagh, Palamau, Western Manbhum. How did the British respond? The British were alarmed by the scale of the uprising. They sent large military forces to crush the rebellion. After months of fighting, the British killed many rebels, arrested and punished leaders, used violence to restore order. What were the consequences? Positive for Coals, negative for Coals. Tribal unity and Joan, the rebellion was crushed with force. Raised awareness of tribal issues. Many Coals were killed or punished, inspired later revolts like the Santhal and Birsa Munda movements. British tightened control over tribal lands. Importance in Indian history. The Coal Uprising was one of the first large tribal revolts against British rule. It showed that even the most remote forest communities injustice, the foundation for future tribal resistance movements. It forced the British to rethink land policies in tribal areas, though only slightly. One-line summary. The Coal Rebellion of 1831 was a major tribal uprising in Chotanagpur against British land policies and outsider exploitation, which was finally suppressed by military force. Final thought. The Coal Rising wasn't just a revolt. It was a cry for justice, a defense of identity, and a fight for survival. Would you like a comic strip of this? A mind map for revision? A timeline version? Just tell me. Absolutely. Here's a great, deep, detailed and very simple summary of the background of the Santhal Rebellion, 1855 to 56, written for complete beginners in the easiest English, like a beautiful story. Great, deep, detailed summary of the Santhal Rebellion. 1. Who were the Santhals? The Santhals were a tribal community, also called Adivasis, meaning original inhabitants, who lived in forests, hills and villages. Loved nature, they worshipped trees, animals and forest spirits. Lived in peace away from big cities. Were farmers, hunters and woodcutters. Had their own language, music, dances and customs. Didn't care about money or taxes, they just wanted to live free and simply. 2. When and why did they come to Bengal? Around the 1780s, Santhals moved into the area of Bengal, especially near Rajmahal Hills. The British rulers wanted forests to be cleared and land to be used for farming. British and landlords, zamindars, needed cheap labour to grow crops and earn more taxes. So they invited the Santhals, "Come clear the forest, grow food, and we'll give you land." The Santhals, who loved nature and farming, agreed. 3. What was Damini Co? In 1832, the British created a special area just for Santhals between Rajmahal and Bhagalpur. This area was called Damini Co, a Persian word that means edge of the hills. Santhals were told, "This land is yours. Live here, grow crops and become settled farmers." The Santhals believed this offer and began to build homes, clear forests, create villages, start farming. Their population grew fast. By the 1850s, thousands of Santhals lived in that area. 4. Then came the problems. At first, life was peaceful, but slowly, things became worse. Why? A. Greedy zamindars, landlords, demanded high taxes from Santhals, took away their land if they couldn't pay, kept false records and cheated them. B. Cruel moneylenders, gave money with huge interest. If a Santhal borrowed 10, he had to return 100. When Santhals couldn't repay, they lost their land, cattle, even homes. Corrupt police and courts always supported zamindars and moneylenders, beaten, jailed or insulted Santhals who complained. Santhals didn't understand the British law system. They were helpless. 5. Santhals became like slaves. Imagine a peaceful tribal family. They came here to farm and live freely. But now they were losing land, living in debt, getting punished for no reason, treated like criminals or animals. They felt, "This is not our land anymore. We have become prisoners on our own land." 6. Anger began to grow. By the early 1850s, thousands of Santhals were angry, hurt and betrayed. They remembered, "We were promised a new life, but they lied to us. We must stand up." They began to gather in secret. They talked about resistance, maybe even revolt. They were ready to say, "No more, we will fight back." What happened next? This is just the background. But this background directly led to the Santhal Rebellion in 1855, where brave leaders like Sidhu and Kanhu said, "We will no longer follow British rule. We declare our own government. We will fight for our rights." In very simple words, moved by British to clear Forupetchu. Santhal Adivasi tribe loved nature, lived peacefully, moved to Bengal 1780s, invited by British to clear forests and grow crops. Damini Kothe too, land area given to Santhals by British between Bhagalpur and Rajmahal Hills. What went wrong? Landlords and moneylenders started cheating them. Suffering, high taxes, debt traps, police brutality. Result? Santhals got angry and decided to fight. Would you like me to continue with the Santhal Rebellion itself? How it began, who led it, and what happened during the fight? Or do you want a comic, video, or diagram of this story? I'm ready to create anything you need. Just tell me. Absolutely. Here's a deep and detailed summary of the passage about the Santhal Rebellion 1855-56 in the simplest way possible. Perfect for anyone, even if you're hearing this for the very first time. Great deep detailed summary of the Santhal Rebellion 1855-1856. Who were the Santhals? The Santhals were a tribal group, simple people who lived in forests and did farming. They came to Bengal, eastern India, around the 1780s. They were peaceful, loved nature, and depended on the forest and land. They believed that their forests and sacred groves had spirits that protected them. Farming, plough agriculture, was not just a job for them, it was a way of life. Why did they come to the region? British officials and zamindars, landlords, wanted to turn wild forests into farming land to grow crops and make money. So they invited Santhals to settle in a forested region called Jangal Mahals, means forest areas. Santhals were good at clearing land and growing crops, so they were hired and encouraged to settle and farm. What was Damini Ko? By 1832, the British created a special area Santhals between Rajmahal and Bhagalpur. This place was called Damini Ko, means land of the foothills. It was supposed to be a safe homeland where Santhals could live, farm, and not be disturbed. Santhals moved in large numbers, cleared land, and began settled farming. By the 1850s, they had built a strong community there. What went wrong? 1. Loss of land. The Santhals cleared forests and farmed, but then their land started being taken from them. 2. Heavy taxes. The British government started charging high taxes on this land, even though it was the Santhals who worked hard to make it useful. 3. Moneylenders, dikus, outsiders, especially moneylenders, gave loans to Santhals with very high interest. When Santhals couldn't pay back, the dikus took their land away. 4. Landlords take control. Zamindars started acting like rulers over the land, even though it was promised to Santhals. 5. Forced labour. The British railway companies made Santhals work without pay on railway construction. This is called forced labour. 6. Disintegration of community. Due to all this suffering, some Santhals migrated away. This broke the unity of the community, which the Santhals found very painful. The rebellion begins. In June 1855, 2 brave Santhal brothers, Sidhu and Kanhu, called for rebellion. They told their people, "Let's fight back, enough is enough." Thousands of Santhals joined. Many poor and oppressed people, other than Santhals, also supported them. The rebellion was not just about land, it was about freedom, dignity, and survival. What happened in the rebellion? The Santhals attacked moneylenders, zamindars, and British officials, destroyed records of loans and taxes, declared that British rule was over. The rebellion became widespread and dangerous for the British. But the British Army used modern weapons and crushed the rebellion by 1856. Thousands of Santhals died, including Sidhu and Kanhu. Aftermath and impact. Even though the rebellion failed, it shook the British government. To calm the Santhals, the British created a separate district called Santhal Parganas. This allowed Santhals to have some control over their lives and land. Why the Santhal rebellion is important. It was one of the first major tribal uprisings against British rule. It showed how exploitation, injustice, and broken promises can lead to mass resistance. It reminds us of the courage of a tribal community that stood up to a mighty empire. Final thoughts, super simple. Santhals were promised land and peace. They got taxes, cheating, and pain instead. So they fought for their rights. They lost the battle, but they showed the world their spirit could never be broken. Let me know if you want. A timeline, a comic strip, a video script, a story version like a bedtime story. A quiz to help you remember this better. I'm here to make learning easy, deep, and fun for you. Here is a great, deep, and detailed summary of the Santhal Rebellion, 1855–56, explained clearly, slowly, and in very simple words, as if you are reading the best history book written just for you. Deep, detailed summary of the Santhal Revolt, 1855–56. 1. Who were the Santhals? Santhals were a tribal community people living in forests and hilly areas. They were peace-loving, hard-working, and simple people. Their main job was farming and hunting. Their religion was based on nature. They respected trees, forests, and had a strong belief in spirits of the land. 2. Why did they come to Bengal and settle there? Around the 1780s, the British and local landlords, zamindars, wanted to grow more crops and make more money from land. They invited the Santals to settle in a forest area in Bengal called Jungle Mahals. The British thought, these people are hard-working and obedient. Let's use them to clear forests and farm more land. So Santals were asked to clear forests, grow crops, and make the land useful for revenue taxes. 3. Creation of Damini Co. 1832. In 1832, the British carved out a special area called Damini Co., meaning skirts of the hills, between Bhagalpur and Rajmahal. This land was meant only for Santals to live in peace and do farming. The Santal population quickly grew, and by the 1850 they had built many villages and cultivated a lot of land. 4. How were Santals exploited? Even though the Santals worked hard and cleared the land, zamindars, landlords, and moneylenders started cheating them. British started heavy taxes on land the Santals had cleared themselves. Moneylenders, called dikus by Santals, gave loans at high interest. If Santals couldn't pay, the dikus took away their land. The Santals had no legal help. They didn't understand the courts or the documents. European railway contractors forced Santals to work without pay, forced labour. Their tribal life and unity began to break down, and many Santals had to run away to other... 5. Why did the rebellion start? The Santals could pain. They were cheated, overtaxed, forced to work and losing land. Their tribal identity was breaking. So, in June 1855, two brave brothers, Sidhu Murmu and Kanhu Murmu, raised a call for revolt. They said, "We are not the slaves of British or zamindars. We want our land and freedom back." 6. How did the rebellion happen? Thousands of Santals gathered with bows, arrows, axes, and traditional weapons. They declared independence from the British. Their fight spread across large areas in Bengal, Bihar, and Jharkhand. Many poor farmers, Dalits, and low castes joined them because they also hated the landlords and moneylenders. Attacked lenders and declared war against injustice. 7. How was it crushed? The British were shocked and scared, but they had modern guns, cannons, and trained army. They launched a brutal military attack, burned Santhanthal villages, killed and arrested rebels, used brutal force to scare the rest. In August 1855, Sidhu Murmu was caught and killed. In February 1856, Kanhu Murmu was also captured and killed. 8. What happened after the revolt? The rebellion ended, but it shook the British deeply. To calm things down, they created a new area called Santhal Pargana in 1856. 5,500 square miles were taken from Bhagalpur and Birbhum. It became a separate district, laws for Santals. British hoped, if we give them their own land and some peace, maybe they won't rebel again. 9. Importance and legacy. The Santhal Revolt was the first big peasant farmer rebellion in Indian history. It showed that tribals and farmers could fight unitedly against injustice. It also showed the cruelty of the British system and how economic greed destroyed peaceful lives. 10. Santhal memory today. Even today, Santhals proudly celebrate their fight as a glorious moment. They celebrate the Hull Festival, Hull Rebellion. They worship Sidhu and Kanhu as heroes. Statues of the brothers can be seen in many places in Jharkhand and Bengal. Why this revolt matters. It was not just a fight. It was a cry for dignity, land, and freedom. It came before 1857, the first war of independence. It's a symbol of tribal courage and resistance to injustice. Key terms you should remember. Term meaning Santhals, a tribal group from Bengal, Bihar, Jharkhand area. Dikus, outsiders, especially moneylenders, landlords who cheated Santhals. Zamindars, landowners who collected rent from farmers. Sidhu and Kanhu, brave leaders of the Santhal Revolt. Damini Co., land area created for Santhals in 1832. New district formed in 1856, after the rebellion, Santhal Festival to remember their rebellion. If you want timeline, MCQ's quiz, more comic strips, story version like a novel, let me know. I'm here to teach you in the best way possible. Absolutely. Here's a great, deep, detailed summary of the Ahom Revolt, 1828 to 1833, in very simple and clear language, with all the important facts, reasons, events, and outcomes. The Ahom Revolt, 1828 to 1833, full, deep, simple summary. Who were the Ahoms? The Ahoms were a powerful royal dynasty in Assam, located in the northeast of India. They ruled Assam for around 600 years, from the 13th century until the early 19th century. The Ahom kingdom had its own king, nobles, called paiks or officials, a strong army, independence from outsiders. The Ahoms were proud rulers and had a long, glorious history. Invasion by Burma, Myanmar. In the early 1800s, the Burmese from Myanmar invaded Assam. The Burmese occupation was brutal. They tortured locals, killed people, and destroyed villages. The people of Assam were in great pain and fear. British East India Company steps in. In 1824, the British declared war on Burma. This was the First Anglo-Burmese War, 1824 to 1826. The British entered Assam to fight Burma and push them out. The British won, and Burma was defeated. The war ended with the Treaty of Yandabo, 1826. The British promised to leave. The British promised the Ahoms and Assamese people, "We are only here to help defeat Burma. After that, we will go away and return your land." This was a key promise, and breaking it caused the revolt. The promise is broken. After the war ended, the British did not leave Assam. Instead, they started ruling Assam as part of their growing empire. They wanted to include Assam permanently in the British Company's territory. The Ahom nobility, royal officials and nobles, were very angry. They felt betrayed. They lost their kingdom, power, and respect. They wanted their freedom and old rule back. The First Ahom Revolt, 1828. What the Ahoms did. In 1828, the Ahom nobles led a rebellion to take back their kingdom. They proclaimed a young prince named Gomdar Konwar as the new Ahom king. They planned to march to Rangpur, the old Ahom capital city, and defeat the British, restore the Ahom dynasty, rule Assam again. The people were hopeful. They wanted their land, king, and honour back. What the British did. The British had superior military power, stronger soldiers, better weapons, more resources. Before the rebels could fully start their fight or reach Rangpur, the British attacked them, crushed the rebellion, captured Gomdar Konwar, punished many Ahom leaders. The rebellion was short-lived and unsuccessful. Second attempt at rebellion. 1830. In 1830, the Ahoms started planning another revolt. They were still unhappy and wanted independence. However, this time the British changed their strategy. British choose peace, Pacific policy. Instead of using force again, the British used a peaceful approach, called Pacific policy. They tried to calm the people down and make peace with the Ahom leadership. What did the British do? In 1833, the British gave back part of Assam, specifically Upper Assam, to a local king. This king was Maharaj Purandar Singh Narendra. He was from an Assamese noble family and had connections with the Ahom. The British allowed him to rule, but only under British control. So Assam got back a small part of its independence, but not complete freedom. Results and importance. End of the Ahom dynasty. After this revolt, the Ahom royal family never came back to full power. British control over Assam increased slowly. In 1838, even the part given to Purandar Singh was taken back. Assam became fully a part of the British Indian Empire. Historical importance. 1. Early resistance to British rule. The Ahom revolt was one of the first major revolts against the British in India before 1857. 2. Betrayal by the British. It shows how the British used war and then broke promises to take over Indian land. 3. Local pride and identity. It was a fight to save Assamese identity, royal tradition, and independence. 4. Lesson in strategy. British used military force first in 1828 and peaceful diplomacy later in 1833. This became a common method in British rule. Full timeline, year, event. 1824, First Anglo-Burmese War begins. 1826, Treaty of Yandabo ends war. British promise to leave Assam. 1828. Ahom's rebel declare Gomdha. 1828. British the Ahom's rebellion fails. 1830. Second rebellion planned. 1833. British give Upper Assam to Maharaja Puranda Singh Narendra. 1838. British take back Upper Assam. Full control established. Key people. Name, role. Gomdha Konwa, Ahom prince made king during 1828 revolt. Puranda Singh Narendra, local ruler, given part of Assam in 1833. Ahom, home nobility, royal family members, ministers, officers who led revolt. British East India Company, British traders turned rulers who took over Assam. Key terms in simple language. Term, meaning The old royal rulers of Assam. Revolt, a fight or rebellion against the rulers. British East India Company, British group that ruled parts of India. Burman War, war between British and Burma, Myanmar. Pacific policy, British peaceful method instead of war. Proclaimed king, publicly declared someone as king. The Ahom revolt was not just a small rebellion. It was a symbol of Assamese pride, a reaction to broken promises, a warning to the British that people would fight back. Although the revolt failed, it became an early example of resistance and inspired future freedom struggles in India. Would you like a comic strip, a visual timeline, or a short animated video script of this? I can prepare it next. Here is a great, deep and detailed summary of the Khasi Revolt, 1829 to 1833, in the simplest and clearest way possible, like the world's best teacher would explain. Summary of the Khasi Revolt, 1829 to 1833. 1. Background: British expansion in the hills. After the First Anglo-Burmese War, 1824-26, the British East India Company gained more control in the northeastern part of India, especially in Assam and nearby areas. They wanted to improve their control by building a military road between the Brahmaputra Valley, Assam, and Sylhet, now in Bangladesh. This road was to pass through the hills of Meghalaya, which were home to many tribal communities like Khasis, Garos, Jaintias. The British plan and local opposition. To build this long road, the British brought in English engineers and Bengali labourers from the plains. These outsiders started entering tribal villages, forests, rivers, and sacred spaces. The British also started occupying tribal territories without proper agreements. The hill tribes saw this as an invasion of their land, culture, and freedom. Tirat Singh rises up. The leader of the Khasi resistance was Tirat Singh, the Siam chief of Nunclo, a powerful Khasi kingdom. He strongly opposed the British presence, said, "This is our land, outsiders are not welcome," decided to lead a rebellion to drive the British out. 4. Formation of a tribal alliance. Tirat Singh didn't fight alone. He brought together the Khasis, his own people, the Garos from the west, the Kamptis and Singphos tribes from the northeast. This was a rare unity among hill tribes, all joining to protect their land from British control. 5. Nature of the revolt, 1829 to 1833. The revolt lasted for 4 years. The tribal people used guerrilla warfare. They attacked suddenly and then disappeared into the hills and forests. They used bows, arrows, swords and spears. They knew the forests and mountains better than the British. The British had guns, cannons and well-trained troops, better supply chains and modern military tactics. Despite this, the revolt continued for a long time because of the bravery and determination of the tribal fighters. 6. British suppression of the revolt. By 1833, the British grew impatient. They sent large army forces into the hills, destroyed villages that supported Tirat Singh, captured or killed many rebels, forced people to surrender. Finally, the Khasi revolt was crushed, and British control over the region was established. 7. Result of the revolt. Tirat Singh became a symbol of resistance for the tribal people. The British gained full control of the Khasi hills, but the revolt delayed British plans and showed that tribal people were ready to fight for their land. Deep insights. Point. Land invasion. The revolt was not about money or taxes, but about the protection of sacred land and culture. Tribal unity. Tribes that were often separate came together to fight a common enemy, the British colonial power. Guerrilla warfare. This revolt used local tactics, showing that even without modern weapons, people could resist a powerful army. Freedom spirit. The Khasi Revolt was one of the early resistances in India's freedom struggle before the Great Revolt of 1857. Why the Khasi Revolt is important in history. It tells us that every corner of India, including far-off tribal hills, had people who stood up to them. It shows us that freedom fighters came not just from big cities and forests. It helps us respect the role of tribal against colonialism. TLDR. Didn't read. The British wanted to build a road through Khasi tribal lands. They brought in outsiders, which made local people angry. Tirat Singh, a local chief, led a 4-year revolt with other tribal groups. The revolt was brave and powerful, but was finally suppressed in 1833 by the British Army. It remains a symbol of early tribal resistance in India's freedom movement. Would you like this turned into a coloured comic strip, timeline, audio story, or animated explanation next? Just say the word. I'm ready.
Here, great, deep, and simple detailed summary of the Pagalpanthi and Farisi revolts, explained like a top teacher would explain to someone with no background knowledge at all. This summary gives full clarity, step by step, using simple English, real-life comparisons, and full understanding of causes, leaders, actions, and effects. Detailed summary. Pagalpanthi and Farisi revolts. Part 1. Pagalpanthi revolt, late 1700s to 1840s. 1. What was the Pagalpanthi movement? The Pagalpanthis were a semi-religious and semi-political group in North Bengal, today's Bangladesh, and parts of West Bengal. The word Pagal means mad or crazy, but in this case, it referred to people deeply involved in spiritual life, often seen as different or saint-like. They were mostly poor tribal and peasant people who followed their leaders' teachings to live with honesty, simplicity, and faith. 2. Who started it and why? The movement was founded by Karam Shah, a respected spiritual leader. He gathered poor people, both Muslims and Hindus, and taught them to follow a peaceful, equal, and spiritual life. At that time, British rule had strengthened the power of zamindars, landlords, who exploited poor farmers by demanding very high rents. These farmers, called tenants, had no protection and were often punished or evicted if they couldn't pay rent. Karam Shah's movement gave these poor tenants hope, guidance, and a community to resist injustice. 3. Who was Tipu, and what did he do? After Karam Shah died, his son Tipu became the leader of the movement. Tipu added a political goal to the movement, fighting directly against the landlords and the British system. In 1825, Tipu and his followers captured Shirpur, a town in Bengal, and declared himself ruler. Tipu acted like a people's king, trying to protect farmers from harsh treatment. His rebellion spread to nearby areas, including the Garo Hills. 4. What did they want? Fair treatment for poor farmers, end of oppression by zamindars, control over their land and crops, religious and social equality, resisting British-supported cruelty. 5. What happened in the end? The British and zamindars saw the movement as a threat. They sent troops and suppressed the rebellion. Fighting and disturbances continued in the area for years, into the 1830s and 1840s. Though the movement was crushed, it showed how poor people could unite for their rights and dignity. Part 2. Farisi Movement, 1818-1857. 1. What was the Farisi movement? The Farisis were a Muslim religious reform group that also fought for social justice and freedom from British rule. The name Farisi comes from Fariz, which means compulsory religious duties in Islam, like prayer, honesty, fairness. They believed that Muslims had forgotten true Islam and had to bring back its pure form. 2. Who started it and why? The movement was started by Haji Shariatullah in Faridpur, eastern Bengal. He had gone to Mecca and returned with the idea that Muslims in Bengal had adopted wrong practices and were also politically weak under British rule. He wanted to purify Islam, stop un-Islamic customs, and unite Muslims, especially the poor farmers. Who continued the movement after him? After his death, his son Dadu Mian became the leader in 1838. Dadu Mian was bold and organized the movement very effectively. He added a political side, resisting British rule and ending the cruelty of zamindars. 4. What did they fight against? British colonial rule, which was considered unjust and harmful to Islam, zamindars, who overcharged poor Muslim farmers, wrong religious practices like mixing Hindu and Islamic rituals, corruption, and disrespect of religion. 5. What did they want? Religious purity, following only true Islamic duties, social justice, helping the poor and stopping exploitation, end to landlord oppression, freedom from British control, a clean, fair, united society based on Islamic values. 6. What actions did they take? Stopped paying unfair rents, held mass religious gatherings, preached to reform society, encouraged people to stand up against zamindars, challenged British rule peacefully and sometimes with resistance. 7. How long did it last and what happened? The movement was very active from 1838 to 1857. Many Farizis were punished or jailed, but their support kept growing. After the revolt of 1857, the movement declined. Many Farizis later joined the Wahhabi movement, another Islamic group that wanted religious and political reform. Key comparison table. Aspect? Pagalpanthis. Farizis? Founder Karam Shah Haji Shariatullah. Main leader of his son, Dadu Mian his son. Area, North Bengal, Sherpur, Garo Hills, Eastern Bengal, Faridpur, and nearby. Nature, semi-religious, tribal, political. Religious, Islamic, social, political. Supported, poor peasants, both Hindu and Muslim. Poor Muslim farmers. Fought against zamindars and British. Zamindars and British. Goals, justice, fair rent, and oppression. Religious purity, justice, and oppression. Timeline. Around 1825 to 1840s, 1838 to 1857. Fate, crushed by British, declined after 1857, joined Wahhabis. Final wrap-up. Both Pagalpanthi and Farizi movements were early peasant revolts in Bengal during British rule. They were led by religious leaders, but they were not just about religion. They fought for social justice. They arose because zamindars and British rulers were exploiting poor farmers. They showed how faith and courage could unite the common people against powerful rulers. Though both movements were suppressed, they helped create a tradition of protest and resistance in Indian history. Would you like a visual map, timeline, or comic summary of this next? Here is a great, deep, and detailed summary of the Kand Revolt, written in the simplest and clearest language possible. Perfect for a beginner, student, or anyone who wants to truly understand it fully and deeply. Kand Revolt, great detailed summary. Simple words, deep clarity. Who were the Kands? The Kands were a tribal community, people living in forests and hills, away from cities, mainly found in the state of Odisha, then called Orissa. Some of them also lived in Andhra Pradesh. They were known locally as Kui, which is also the name of their language. The Kands lived simple lives. They believed in nature, spirits, and old tribal customs. They farmed, hunted, and worshipped their gods in traditional ways. They did not use much money, and they lived freely without any outside rule for centuries. Why did the Kands revolt? The Kand Revolt was a strong and violent resistance against the British government, which had started ruling Odisha. The Kands revolted because they were deeply hurt, disturbed, and angry by the sudden and harsh changes brought by the British. Let's break the reasons into simple parts. 1. British land revenue policy. The British introduced taxes on land. Even forest dwellers like Kands were told to pay money as tax. Kands didn't use money much and didn't believe in paying for land that had always been theirs. This made them confused, helpless, and angry. Why it hurt? Imagine if someone tells you that you now have to pay rent to use your own home, which your family has lived in for generations. You would feel insulted and cheated. That's how the Kands felt. 2. Cruelty of landlords and moneylenders. Landlords, zamindars, were given power by the British to collect taxes. They became very cruel and exploited the poor tribal people. Moneylenders gave small loans but charged very high interest. If the Khans could not repay, they lost their land or had to work like slaves. Why it hurt? The Khans were already poor. These new people came, gave them money, and trapped them in debt, stealing their land and freedom. Narder 3. Ban on Mariah system, tribal religious custom. The Khans believed in a ritual of human sacrifice called the Mariah system. They believed it pleased their gods and brought good harvests. The British banned this practice as inhuman and illegal. The Khans saw this as an attack on their religion and traditions. Why it hurt? To the Khans, this was like telling them their god was wrong. They felt their whole faith and culture was being destroyed. 4. New rules and restrictions. The British government made many new laws. The Khans were not consulted, and they didn't understand these laws. Forest access was restricted. Their free tribal way of life was taken away. Why it hurt? The Khans were being told how to live by people they didn't trust, and who didn't care about their needs. They felt like prisoners in their own land. Where did the revolt happen? The revolt took place across many tribal areas of Odisha, including Gumsar, Chinakimedi, Kalahandi, Patna-Odisha region. It was a widespread tribal movement, not just a local fight. Who were the leaders? 1. Chakra Bisoy, the first and main leader, a bold Khan warrior who united many tribal groups to resist British rule. 2. Radhakrishna Dandasena took leadership in the later stage of the revolt and continued the struggle against the British. How did they fight? The Khans did not have guns or cannons like the British, but they were fierce and fearless. They used tangi, a sharp battle axe, bows and arrows. They used their knowledge of forests and guerrilla tactics, surprise attacks, to fight. What was the Mariah Agency? The British formed a special department called the Mariah Agency. Its job was to stop the Mariah human sacrifice, watch and control the Khans. The Khans saw this agency as a symbol of British interference in their religion and culture, so they fought it fiercely. What happened in the end? The revolt was very brave and lasted for many years, 1846 to 1855. But the British had stronger weapons and bigger armies. Many Khan fighters were captured or killed. The British finally put down the revolt. However, the Khan revolt became a powerful message. Even poor forest tribes were ready to fight and die for their freedom and beliefs. Why is the Khan revolt important? It was one of the first major tribal revolts in colonial India. It showed that even the simplest communities had a strong spirit of resistance. It reminds us that freedom and dignity are so important that people will risk everything for them. The revolt also forced the British to take tribal needs more seriously. Final recap. Aspect. Explanation. Who? The Khan tribal people of Odisha and Andhra Pradesh. When? 1846 and 1855. Why? British taxes, cruel landlords, banned tribal customs, and forced rules. Leaders, Chakra Bisoy, later Radhakrishna Dandasena. Weapons, tangi, bows, arrows, swords. Enemy, British and their Mariah Agency. Result, revolt crushed but showed strong tribal resistance. Final words. The Khan revolt was not just a fight with weapons. It was a fight to protect identity, culture, land, and dignity. Even though they lost in battle, the courage of the Khans lives on in history. Would you like me to turn this into a comic strip, short story, or timeline poster next?